All right, so how's everybody doing? So welcome to Roundtable 3. I am Eaton Nguyen. I am an assistant professor over at Dominguez Hills in Asian Pacific Studies. For this roundtable, it's going to be revolving around the themes of identity, ideology, and politics in relations with Vietnam. So we have a series of very excellent panelists here. I will introduce each of them. But the core, I guess, guiding sets of questions around this panel primarily relates to how the Vietnamese Americans, and in this case also the Vietnamese diaspora, Vietnamese refugees, Vietnamese exile, how we relate to the country of Vietnam, the government of Vietnam, and its people. How do political identity and ideology influence our relationship with Vietnam and the current Vietnamese government, and vice versa? How do they treat us? How do they see us? How do our experiences, being it social, cultural, political, inform or shape our views of Vietnam and the Vietnamese government? And has the Vietnamese government view of the diaspora changed over time, especially in the context of changing priorities, a more globalized world, a more interconnected world. And lastly, this deep question of reconciliation. Why is reconciliation so difficult? And our panelists, I definitely will provide much insight into these. So our first panelist is Destiny Nguyen. She is an activist for the Vietnamese American community working in preservation efforts to restore honors and respect for service members who serve in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam and the U.S. military service. She is the founder of the Republic of Vietnam Next Generation and sits on the executive board for Human Rights Day. All right, you're up.
Thank you, Eating. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Trung Vũ and the university for organizing such an important event today. As the panelist for Roundtable 3, I think it's the most difficult table. And we received some topic to discuss, and I would like to go straight to each topic that I think is important. First, how do the Vietnamese Americans relate to Vietnam, the country, its government, and its people? In my opinion, the above topic and question are quite complex. There is no one answer for the overall complexity of the relation between Vietnamese American and Vietnamese government. For the roundtable discussion, I think we first need to look of some of the following issues, then we can then hopefully find some answer. First and foremost, Vietnamese Americans have several identities. Regionally, we might come from different parts of Vietnam, like North, Central, or South Vietnam. Each region comes with a different history, custom, food, and dialects. Regional difference influence our political identity and ideology. Our faith, religious belief, whether Buddhist, Catholic, Baptist, Hoa Hao Buddhist, or Cao Dai, is also factored into our identity. As Vietnamese, we came to America by different means, with different reasons. Most Vietnamese initially came to America to escape communism as the political refugees after the war ended. Many, over time, came to America to reunite with their family members. Today, there are now multiple generations of Vietnamese Americans, from those who were born in Vietnam and grew up here to those who were born as a first-generation Vietnamese American. Lastly, education and occupational background are also major factors into how Vietnamese Americans view Vietnam as a country and its communist authority. Just talk about background. Actually, and unfortunately, the day that millions of South Vietnam will cry when the falling of Saigon. Somewhere in the city next to Saigon, which is Bien Hoa, I will cry into to came out my mother's stomach. I born exactly on that day. My father served for the South Vietnam Army. Of course, after that, he would be in jail, which is they call concentration camp, for 10 years. I don't know my dad until I'm 10 years old. When he came home, my mom said, "That's your dad." And as a kid, growing up, 10 years old, in the communist regime, and either like me or Dr. Trường Vũ or many of my brothers and sisters sit here, we know how hard it is for us to go to school. And at that time, actually, I studied pretty good in school, but I never be on the top of the class because of my background. One of my teachers had to adopt me and change my last name to his last name. So I continued to move on. And I think in grade 9 to 10, you have to take some special tests to transfer to like high school. My study at that time that I don't have to take the test, I qualified just to go up to that school. But I cannot go to the school that they call a specialist just for people that, on the top 10. So I have to go to the regular school. At that time, I didn't know anything about my background until I came to America. I didn't know what my dad doing in the past until I came to America. And I saw everywhere in America, even doctor office, they hang American flag. Then I wonder what my flag is. I came home and asked my dad. And I just remember when I was young, every Monday, they make us sing the song to flag the flag, the red and yellow star. So I asked my dad said, "No, that's not your flag." Of course, he had the yellow and 3 red stripes in the house. And then he started telling me the story behind that flag, how he paid his young age until he got out of prison and came to America. We came to America as the HO program. And then I start reading from the first, it's called Đệ Nhất Việt Nam Cộng Hòa, and then the second is Đệ Nhị Việt Nam Cộng Hòa. I read every single book in the library. And then at that time, I worked for the bank as a financial investment for the bank. In the early 90s, around 94, 95, a lot of HO family came to America. And because I can speak Vietnamese, I helped a lot of HO family buying house. They came here, they work hard within 2 or 3 years. Everybody buying house. Then I become a top 10 seller in the bank, and I got promotion so fast that I didn't even know what's going on there because I helped so many Vietnamese people. And from there, I become a community activist because I've been helping so much family of HO. And until now, and after reading the history about, our Republic of Vietnam, I deeply appreciate what my father had done for the country, what Dr. Tung Vu's father and a lot of uncles sitting here, what they did for our country. And for that, how do the political identity, ideology influence Vietnamese American relation with Vietnam and the current government and vice versa? As a Vietnamese, we identify ourselves as a Vietnamese, our country origin, with a lot of affection. As American, we recognize the value of liberty, freedom, democracy as a fundamental rights. Yet, Vietnamese government is clearly failed to provide the people with those basic human rights. As a relationship goes, we quite simple to see that. We love our Vietnam and Vietnamese people. We like Vietnamese people. And just like Vietnamese people, we Vietnamese American distrust the Vietnam authority and its ideology and monopoly power. Mostly, we would like the Vietnamese authority to go away. We would like the government with the true democratic government for the people and by the people, not by corrupt Communist Party members. This is because after more than half century of stay in power, this government has barely improved the lives of the people in Vietnam, while continue to violate their human rights and the religious freedom. Our people deserve much better. Above all, Vietnamese refugees and their descendants in this country carry a political identity as a political refugee. More than anyone else, we understand the danger of communists and the value of democracy, freedom, and human rights. We also need to discuss about motherland and homeland. Let us ask how people perceive the definition of homeland. Where is your home? Vietnam or America? When you get older, where will your home be? When you die, where will your remain be? How did you identify yourself? Vietnamese American or American Vietnamese? I think different Vietnamese American with different backgrounds will have different perspective of Vietnam. The answer will be also depend on their connection with Vietnam by whether they have relatives still living in Vietnam, their ancestors remain buried in the old homeland, they have a connection to the Vietnamese culture and tradition, or completely abandon them as they more influenced by America's diverse culture. Or maybe they have business and investment property in Vietnam. And what about the concept of forgiveness? Regardless of diversity within the Vietnamese community, we can say that the unity of the Vietnamese people is strong and continues to flourish throughout the US. Although there are many communities organized in the city and state, we can say that the history, rich tradition, cultures, and language are the main driving force for such strong unity. Our collective voice and identity as well as recognized as one Vietnamese American community by American public at large. So, collectively, how the Vietnamese American community view Vietnam and the Vietnamese authority. Over time, and with the increase of diversity, do we forgive or forget? Or do we continue to hold Vietnamese authority accountable for their past war crimes, mistreatment, and atrocity toward their own people, even till this very day? I would implore everyone to watch and listen to what Vietnamese authority had done in the past decades to people in Vietnam and the Vietnamese American. Vietnamese single-party political system and continual abuse. Vietnamese foreign policy sell out to China while taking advantage of America's spirit of reconciliation and cooperation. And then meddling into Vietnamese American diaspora, have shown the pattern of unwillingness toward any goodwill at all. Can we have a good relationship when one side continues to oppress our people, pursuing a failed ideology and distorting information from history regard the other side through their reprehensible policy and action? With regard Vietnamese American view of Vietnam, it's been almost 50 years since the fall of Saigon. And Vietnamese Americans still advocate for free, democratic, and independent Vietnam. We are proud that our forefathers have fought for liberty and independence. The Vietnamese Communist Party is a well-oiled propaganda machine. Vietnamese communists evolved over time to retain its absolute power. Recently, on September 10, 2023, Vietnam-US bilateral relation has been elevated to the comprehensive strategic partnership. Without accountability, the Communist Party will have out of control of corruption. The Vietnamese people are further oppressed without democratic society. On September 21st, 2023, less than 2 weeks after the elevation of the bilateral relations, Vietnamese Prime Minister proposed the US to work together with Vietnam to control the opposition of Vietnamese Americans to the communist regime. Could you believe that? This is evident that Vietnamese authorities not only do not respect the fundamental values such as freedom of expression in Vietnam, they also export the transnational repression to the United States. So the more they change, the more they stay the same. To have accountability, I think that our Congress should adopt and pass the Vietnam Human Rights Act in parallel of the new partnership. We also want to emphasize the Vietnamese government needs to stop interfere the lives of Vietnamese Americans living in America. This blatant international violation is not acceptable, as we, the citizens of US, are literally being invaded and controlled again by Communist government of Vietnam. My last topic, but it's never least for 50 years. Why is the reconciliation so difficult between many Vietnamese Americans and the Vietnamese government? Reconciliation doesn't mean foregoing liberty and human dignity. Reconciliation can be achieved with human rights, starting with the right of self-determination through a free and fair election for Vietnamese people who live in Vietnam. According to State Department 2022, there are more than 180 prisoners of conscience in Vietnam. There is no room for dissent and no diversity political voice. Lastly, as a member of Republic of Vietnam Next Generation, we must always work together to protect and honor the proud heritage of our parents who served in the Republic of Vietnam, as well as American service members who all had made so much sacrifice for freedom and for us all. Today and forever, we are represented by Vietnamese heritage of freedom flag. This flag is recognized in many state and local government across the US. And I had talked to the Vietnamese community president of Oregon. He told me there is several cities in Oregon had passed this bill that the yellow and three-stripe flag. It represents for the Vietnamese American community here. And yet, Vietnamese government continue to infiltrate our community to dishonor, undermine, and even try to erase our flag and our identity. How can we reconcile with such a government? Their answer to today's discussion is for all of us to ponder. And we are confident that our conscience will give us the answer. Thank you, and I would like to turn to other members to continue the discussion.
So our next speaker is Jin Hui. He is a trained lawyer, a human rights advocate, a civil society activist who co-founded the Vietnamese Overseas Initiative for Conscience Empowerment, or VOICE, which provide legal assistance for refugees and seek to develop an independent civil society in Vietnam. Jin Hui, yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Since I have a big... All right, sure. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Professor Đường Vũ. Where are you, An? All right, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today to talk about something that I deeply care about, but it's so liberating to speak for the first time in my life representing no one. For the first 10 years of my life, I represented refugees from Vietnam. And then the next 10 years was for civil society and its leaders. First time ever talking, representing myself. And it's liberating, so thank you, An. It is also great to be here so that I can be connected with all my former colleagues, friends, supporters from all over America. So thank you, An Đường Vũ, and everyone else, especially Holly as well, for arranging for accommodation all. Now, before I begin my input on this topic, I have a few things to clarify. Number one, my knowledge is quite limited. I've never been trained as a political scientist. So my knowledge is not only limited, but also I've never studied in the US. I became a lawyer in Australia. I did my master's in England, never in the US. Another thing that I need to clarify is that, yes, I was the co-founder of VOICE, and I was its executive director for 10 years, but I left it 4 years ago. So my knowledge could be out of date, could be very irrelevant. Please bear that in mind. Last but not least, I'm actually not Vietnamese American. I'm first Vietnamese, second Vietnamese Australian, third Vietnamese Australian American. So, today's Vietnamese Americans contending, I feel like, man, I'm a fake one, So don't listen to me, right? All right. Because of my limited knowledge, and I'm not an expert on reconciliation, and yet reconciliation it's got so many meanings and so many misconceptions. So what did I do? I called around. I called and I talked to friends and supporters who I have worked with for years so that they can say something about reconciliation, especially those that are not here. First person I called, my dad. He was, like your dad, was an officer in the South Vietnamese Army. He went to prison too for 3 years. Then he fled Vietnam, became a boat person. I didn't have my dad for nearly 10 years too, just like you. So we have the same background. I asked, Dad, I'm going to give a talk at this Oregon University. I'm not an expert. What do you think about reconciliation? You know what he said? I'm going to read it out for you because he was an English teacher in Vietnam. So this is his words. Reconciliation is a word that is very easily misunderstood, if not most misunderstood. To me, true reconciliation can hardly, and he capitalized all the letters hardly, take place with the communists. Again, he said, to me, true reconciliation can hardly take place with the communists. Why did he say that? I think because he was a political prisoner, because his house was confiscated, our family was sent to the new economic zone. He lost his youngest son, my youngest brother, in the economic zone. He lost everything, including a chance to be a father to all of us. Of course he won't trust the communists. So what is it? I think when we talk about reconciliation, background is very important. Yeah? We are a product of our environment. Reconciliation between Destiny and I may not even be the same, let alone between me and my son who was born here in the US. Second person I talked to, Anh Nguyễn Ngọc Ngang. He was invited here, can't come. He's a bit sick. The doctor doesn't allow him to travel anymore. I said, Anh Ngang, reconciliation, what have you got to say? Because I've worked with him, right? I stood on the same stage with him and he said, I don't know what it means, but I'm going to give you some facts. And these are his facts. Every year, $18 billion is sent to Vietnam. Over 500,000 Vietnamese return to Vietnam annually. So that's roughly 20 billion a year. That's a lot of money, right? Especially in the old days. That was a good source to prop up the regime. That is the reality on the ground. So therefore, reconciliation has been taking place already, whether you like it or not. It is conflicting, however, because on the one hand, we have to go back to Vietnam because there are roots there. There are personal business roots there. But at the same time, some of us don't approve the legitimacy of the government there. So, what he said is, reconciliation is often not spoken up loud and clear in the community, but it is taking place. That's Anh Ngang's take on reconciliation. Next, I called Anh Nam Lộc, another MC that works with me, and he was also a board member of Voice, the NGO that I helped found. And he said, with reconciliation, the most important things that we've got to remember is number one, cảm thông, which is not more than just understanding, right? It's about empathy. Cảm thông has to be empathy as well. He said the empathy is not just to the other side, but within our community. And because I'm not just a Vietnamese American, I'm Vietnamese Australian, I'll tell you, there's a difference between the Vietnamese Australians and Vietnamese Americans. Why is that? You have 4 very distinctive groups of Vietnamese Americans in America. The first group, 140,000 Vietnamese, fled Vietnam in 1975. They've been here for a long time. They're established. They are different from the second group, who are the boat people, and their children, just like me. The third group are those that will resettle under the HO program. The officers and the family members that were separated for years, they were the one that were persecuted the most. Within the groups that left in 1975 and the group that resettled later, whose families are not even united entirely to this day. You think there's a difference between those groups? Yes. And the last group, which makes a huge group in America, are the immigrants. Australia doesn't have Vietnamese immigrants like the US does. Why is that? The US has a very liberal immigration program. Brothers and sisters can sponsor each other. And immigrants are different from refugees. Immigrants, they flee for family reasons, economic reasons, but not political reasons. You have a large group here are not very politically aware of what's going back in Vietnam, right? Those are the 4 distinctive groups. Can we have cảm thông within those groups? It's harder than in Australia. In Australia, we don't have the 1975 group. We also don't have the HO group. We only have the boat people group, and that's it. Family migration, we have it, but very limited. As a result, even in Australia, you will see that there's more harmony, there's more unity within the community than in the US. And that's a fact. Next, I called up Ji Lang. Ji Lang Gao is my neighbor. She's a professor of law at Chapman University. And she also is the daughter of a former general in Vietnam, General Cao Van Vien. I asked her, Jay, you talk a lot about these things. What have you got to say? And this is what she says. Reconciliation means making room for others, giving space. Means taking incremental steps towards the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That, to her, is what reconciliation is needed. It has to be centered around human rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If you don't have that shared goal, you will not have true reconciliation. So that's a take on a Vietnamese American law professor and a writer. So then I thought, well, those are the views. What about views of non-Vietnamese, but who loves Vietnam as much as we all do? So I called the former ambassador to Vietnam, Ambassador Ted Osis. I said, and Ted, by the way, I met up with Ted during my work with Voice as its executive director. At the time, we were helping a lot of young Vietnamese activists going out to the West to learn about human rights and democracy and how to organize themselves, right? And Ted said, the most important thing, or the most important word for all of us to think about when we talk about reconciliation is trust. We've got to trust each other. He said, the Vietnamese government has got to trust that the Vietnamese overseas community only wants Vietnam to be better. Vice versa. The Vietnamese community overseas has got to trust that the Vietnamese government is also trying to make it better. Then I thought, okay, so that's your take. I thought, okay, but they all kind of views from outside of Vietnam, right? What about views from Vietnam? What about the official view from Vietnam? Well, 2 weeks ago, for the first time, through Ambassador Ted Osis, I met the Vietnamese ambassador to the US, Nguyễn Quốc Dũng. I met him, and we spoke for a little bit, and he gave me his card. So I thought, okay, well, since I have your number, and since I'm not representing anyone right now, I'm going to call you up and I'm going to ask you. So I did. And you know what? He actually replied. I was very surprised that he would reply to my text because, first of all, because of my work, I've been allowed back in Vietnam for 15 years. Both my bà nội and bà ngoại, my paternal grandmother, my maternal grandmother died, and I couldn't go back to pay my last respect. I'm the first, the eldest, and the only grandson in the family. And being Vietnamese, you know how that's important in our culture, but I just couldn't do it. I asked Anh Dũng, I'm going to give a talk. Reconciliation, what have you got to say? He paused for a little while, then he said, all I want to ask is this. If 50 years ago, America and Vietnam were enemies, and now they are strategic, comprehensive partners, why can't Vietnamese do the same? He didn't really answer the question. He just posed another difficult question for me to ponder. Then I pass it on to you. That's Anh Dũng take. I want to pause here, and I also want to say a bit about reconciliation when it comes to how I understand it. The last person I asked is actually my wife. I asked her this morning. I said, I'm going to give a talk. What have you got to say? She works in Vietnam sometimes. She speaks Vietnamese fluently, just like me. She said, shared goal. Shared goal. So it really depends on which goal you're talking about. If you talk about economic goals, Vietnam has actually done pretty good. According to the World Bank, and I just did this, according to the World Bank, from 2002 to 2022, within 20 years, Vietnam's GDP per capita has increased 3.6 times. That's a lot in 20 years. Yeah? If you talk about civil rights, Vietnam has changed for the better. Before Doi Moi in 1986, you can't even travel within the provinces of Vietnam. Right now, as a Vietnamese passport holder, you can freely travel within ASEAN, the 10 member states, freely. You don't have to ask anyone for any permission. If you have money, you buy and you go. That's the reason why Voice was stationed in the Philippines and then later in Thailand for 10 years. Socially, Vietnam has changed for the better. Civil rights, we have more civil rights, not less civil rights. I remember when I was still the executive director of Voice, taking a bunch of Vietnamese youth leaders to Burma for them to learn about civil society. This was even like, before Aung San Suu Kyi became the honorable president. And I was sitting with other Burmese activists. And the guy sitting right next to me, and I said, hey, how long have you been doing this? I've been doing this since my student days. He looks about, in his 40s, 1988. Then I went to prison, and I said, how long did you go to prison for? I went to prison for 20 years. I'm like, 20 years? Burmese civil society compared to Vietnamese civil society is entirely different. Vietnam at the time didn't imprison people for 20 or 30 years. Okay? It imprisoned people for 3 or 5 years at the time. Now it's more. Now it's like 10 years. If you say some bad on the internet. But Burmese, they just get killed. In China, there's not even the existence of an independent civil society movement. Vietnam does. China doesn't. So we go back to shared goal, right? If you talk about economic rights, it's pretty good. If you talk about civil rights, it's not bad. If you talk about political rights, well, we know the answer. It hasn't changed that much. Destiny said it, right? So it depends on which goal are you talking about in terms of reconciliation. So, therefore, this is my take. Reconciliation takes time. It depends on what your background is and what the context is. If I were still the executive director of Voice and a human rights activist, because I'm not right now, I wouldn't even call the ambassador, Nguyễn Quốc Dũng. Because before I call, I would have to meet with all my staff and my supporters, and there'll be arguments, should I reach out, should I not reach out? So context is very important. Background is very important. Whatever the case might be, however, I can see that all of you in here share the same goal with me. Each of us has reconciled in our own way as to how to help Vietnam and to preserve our own legacy. So I'm going to end my talk by saying, chính chúng ta phải là sự thay đổi mà chúng ta muốn thấy trong xã hội. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, and our final speaker is Deng Trung Dao. Deng Trung Dao is a Vietnamese writer, poet, and author from Boston, Massachusetts. He has written and published 14 books in the Vietnamese language and delivers speeches on human rights, community building, and youth empowerment in the US, Europe, and Asia. All right, Beck.
I gotta do different. I'm not gonna go there or sit here. I sit right here. Right? This morning I was very moved to listen to Vũ Tường, opening remark, and he mentioned about republic, and it's so important. It reminds me about the story. 24 years ago, I was invited to make a speak in UMass University. And in that speak, I try to remind everybody in the room that the war in Vietnam, not just North Vietnam and American. The wisdom and consequence of the Vietnam War is not suffering by people from the North or American. If you compare the number between American 58,000, how many Vietnamese in the South have died for 20 years? That's a lot, few million at least, and no one really pay attention on it. Every year they sit down, they talk about the future, try to heal the problem, try to heal the war between the winner and the loser. But what about us? What about 20 million people of Vietnamese die? How many die in the war, and how many still suffering after the war? And no one really pay attention on that number. So I think when we bring up the issue, the bias in political is so important and make me really impressed for that. And second one is just want to have a personal appraisal for the scholar. My old commendation is go to the scholar who spend their life in study on Asian politics, Vietnamese politics, history. Look back 20 years ago, we didn't have many. No one really mentioned much about republic. The term republic is very strange. When people talk about republic, they talk about the republic of Mr. Nguyễn Văn Thiệu, republic of the Nguyễn Cao Kỳ. The republic start from early 18th century in the South Vietnam, and no one really care about much. That's the truly republic, not republic of between 1955 to 1975. So the group of scholars like this have wake up the whole nation. And I think this is very, very great, and I thank you so much for what you guys working on it. Last week, I walked on the street of Istanbul, and I see the mosque flag in Istanbul is half mast. Just like morning flag. I stopped by and asked the guy, say, what that mean? And he said, mean because they mourning for the Palestinians being killed in the Gaza. And I said, yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for people suffering in the war, but I wouldn't put that picture on my Facebook. And the guy asked me why. He said, not just people from Palestine die in the war. What about 1,000 Israel children, women die the first day of the terrorism in Gaza? So if you mourn in one side and you forget mourn in the other side, that's not fair. Human is human, regardless they're from Gaza or from Israel. So when you put them half-mast, you think about both sides of the war. But if you put that different meaning, I wouldn't put that anywhere to put on to show that the half-mast flag. So that is something I just for my speak. And I think most is covered by Destiny and some covered by Trinh Hội. So I probably put a few more thoughts on the issue that could be covered by both of them. Vietnamese community is very much different from the other community. We live in United States. You got to see community of Poland, community of Italian, community of Irish, all kind of people come to US, but we come in different way. See, when the people from Scotland, they come to US, they only have in their life is the future. Don't have much. They don't have much in the past to carry with them. What they care about is they care about family. They care about the future of their children. And Vietnamese come to US a different way. We come here, many of us come here when the church still have smoking from the gun. The many of us just get out from the prison to come here. So we don't have just the past. We don't have just the future. But we carry all the past with us. It's a lot. It's heavy. That affects everything in thinking, psychology, everything that been affected by the community building in here. But after 48 years, we're still here. We get stronger and stronger every time. We have a lot of things we have to take care of, but at least internally, Vietnamese community still is a united community. Every community have a problem. We have problems. We came out from the war just end that half a century. We cannot compare Vietnamese community, but the community was here for 100 years. So we are different, and we have to understand that reality. And to deal with that by reality, we don't cannot compare with anyone. So we have to accept the reality, and from there we move on. The topic been discussion very heated. It's not a heated discussion, but at least bring up that reconciliation. That the river have to bend. You cannot sit one side and ask the other side swim over to reconcile with you. That's not fair. Reconciliation have to be under two, under justice. Not by people who go home, visit their family, rebuild some cemetery. That not is reconciliation. That is something you do from your compassion. The compassion made right, made wrong. We don't know. We don't discuss about it. Everyone have a right to do something maybe different from the other people, but not the base definition of reconciliation. If you look back the history of Eastern Europe, I spent a lot of time to study about Eastern Europe. And the Roundtable we have today is happened in Poland, 1989, 87, and happened to Hungary in 1988. And they have a debate constantly to find out what the reason for. And finally, they agreed that the Communist Party have to leave before election. They may run for election, but they cannot continue to run the country during election. So that's the reason why they said the Communist Party have to go, because they're the only problem for reconciliation of the nation. I believe that many of us have different idea. I go home to visit my family. I go home to build some grave. I go home to do some charity work. You can do anything you want, but you cannot say that is reconciliation. It's not reconciliation. Reconciliation between the people in Vietnam and people have been suffering for 48 years. What did the Communist Party done for 48 years? Nothing. If you see people go to visit Vietnam easier than 20 years ago, that's not reconciliation. The government, Communist government of Vietnam have to move along with the world. They cannot stay the same policy they have done 48 years ago. They have to move along but doesn't mean that they change. Exactly the long at the the constitution of Vietnam. Is any war on that constitution have to rewrite? No. That's the nature of the regime, exactly the same 48 years, exactly the same in the morning of April 30. I have to different color because I go with different people. I have to wear different clothes because I go with different people. Doesn't mean I'm different. No. Myself, inside myself, is the same. I get along with you. Doesn't mean I change to be part of you. No. The communist government have to change outside because they need money. They need investment. They need something to maintain the government. They need something to maintain the domination on our people. So they have to change. But that change is just the outside. The outside, I'm a Buddhist, so nói là chiếc áo không làm nên thầy tu đó. They change something like that, but doesn't mean they change the constitution. Exactly the same. So don't be trapped by some terminology. You can become just by the action. Look at what they've done for our Vietnamese people for 48 years. Nothing. Today we have 240 Vietnamese young people still in prison. And the longer you get boys railing, you go prison. They release one, they take another 10 in the prison. So nothing changed. Don't be trapped by the term. You can do anything you want. You are like Bác Thành. He can go home to rebuild the people in the Biên Hòa cemetery. I think that's a good thing to do. Nothing wrong with that. But doesn't think that is a reconciliation. That's not reconciliation. So I think that I just want to emphasize one thing. Sometimes we misunderstand. Leave the concept the same. Leave the concept right there. But you can make your change based on your compassion, your future, whatever you plan for. But the reconciliation have to be on the justice, have to be on the truth. And that's exactly the same for 48 years. Nothing changed. So we have so many problems, but do we have the benefit? Can we do something for that? The reason the 48 years the Vietnamese Communist Party have not changed. Why? Because we don't put enough pressure to force them to change. The communist government never gave up the power. They never volunteered to get down until we put enough pressure on them to choose. You have to give up or you have to go to the round table. It happened in 1988 in Poland. They've been fighting for several quarters until the end of the negotiation and they get up. So we have to put more pressure on that. Take advantage of the internet open now. Try everything we can to put pressure on the Communist Party. He remind me. I wish I can talk to until tomorrow, but he remind me to stop. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much for all three panelists. Very passionate, very powerful. This huge issue of reconciliation, what do we do with it? How do we understand it? The various definitions that comes out of it. I think Baek Jung Dao puts out this posing of compassion versus politics, of what do we mean by it and how do we resolve it, especially in the context of our identity, where we come from, our history, and that baggage that we carry with us. But now I want to open up the floor to questions.
We'll take 2 questions at a time, right?
Thank you. First of all, I share all of your history. But I do want to say that I don't think that creating walls and speaking really loudly, figuratively, and literally is going to help. And I think that my generation, I was born in the US, I speak fluent Vietnamese, I read and write, I go back to Vietnam twice a year, once a year, I have family there now. My brother lives there. He was in the US Marines. I was in the US Marines. This is not the way to go. There is no solution when we cut off our brother in Vietnam. If we don't agree with our brother, we have to slowly find a way and not shout and yell and demand. Thank you.
Hi, I'm glad that you had an opportunity to have your voice today, Trịnh Hội. However, you spoke for your father, anh Nguyễn Ngọc Ngạn, anh Nam Lộc, chị Lan Cao, ông Ted Osis, Nguyễn Quốc Dũng, and your wife, all of which is hearsay. And I hope to hear from your voice, and it's at the age that you should be speaking from your own voice. So almost 50 years, the ongoing struggle for freedom and democracy in Vietnam motivates and inspires many, including the next generation. The heritage flag of the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, still stand for sacrifice, freedom, and democracy. So despite a difference in focus of those wanting to work on social service and those advocating for freedom and democracy, one is the immediate bandage for social problems. The other is a long-term solution. So my question is, how can Vietnamese American advance human rights and free and fair elections and free and fair nomination of candidates and political discourses in Vietnam?
Sorry, is that a question to me? Or is that to others? I don't know. Is it to me? Hi, Destiny, you want to go first? Ladies first?
They're fighting for everything, even the mic. How can I think I did say in the last part of the speak? The only way we want to make the change is put the pressure on the Communist Party. And I remember when I read about the Hungarian Revolution, the same thing. They sit down on the round table and debate about the role of the Communist Party during the election, whether they can be part, whether they can continue to run the country during election, or anything. The Communist Party in the round table, they try to maintain the Communist Party. And the other side, called the opposition side, say no. You can run it the independent party, but this election run by the committee. So the Communist Party cannot run. The reason for that, because the opposition side roll in every day, to the point the Communist Party have no choice by step down or yielding to the opposition. So that's why we on our side the same thing. I don't see any one of you can show me one thing, including South Africa. The reconciliation is true. No. In South Africa, that no reconciliation until the Nelson Mandela win the presidency. He just set up the committee after he became the president. Not he set up the committee, Salvation Committee before, no. So now, no in the world, no any country have hòa giải before the election. So we have to compromise some point to do something for the country, but cannot say that is reconciliation. So that I just try to go back to my point. You have to do everything to push them to change. They're not going to change. No country, communist country in the world can, including the Gorbachev. Gorbachev did so much work trying to save the Communist Party from Soviet Union. And he, until the point, so many events happened in that very short time before December of the 1991. And then he gave up the power.
Thank you, Judao. Maybe we would want to hear from Destiny or Jinhoi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think with the question of the Attorney Lin Nguyen right there, to have democracy and human rights in Vietnam, I think our Vietnamese communities in the U.S. need to continue our effort. I know a lot of presidents of Vietnamese communities sitting in this room. We need to work with the government of America, whether the Republican Party or Democrat Party, to push and to pressure them when they have a trade with Vietnam. I know right now America have a lot of trade, economic trade with Vietnam. We need to put the human right on the table to pressure them, to open up the country for our people in Vietnam. From there, and I know right now, America bring in education. A lot of our young people in Vietnam now that adopt the education from America. And all of them, even the daughter or son of the government authority, they want to come to America to study. Nobody want to come to China to study in Vietnam. So based on that, when they come here to study, they might come back to help the country because they adopted the culture, diversity cultures here. And from there, maybe the free elections open up for our people in Vietnam. But our Vietnamese community here need to push and need to work with the American government.
Thank you, Ji. Jinhoi, you want to answer?
Well, before I answer the question, if I could just address to Jilin. Thank you, Jilin, for telling me to speak up my voice, but I thought I have spoken already. Just to remind you, I'm the co-founder and former executive director for Voice for 10 years. That's 10 years of my life working full-time. Voice did two things, and it still does two things. Number one, to help resettle refugees from Vietnam. Number two, to help develop independent civil society in Vietnam. Voice continues to its mission to this day. Unfortunately, I have family obligations. I have a 13-year-old son, so I have to be back here in the US to take care of him. I couldn't speak loudly and fully like I did for 20 years of my life. Right now in the room, I have two former colleagues who are Voice interns and then Voice staff. Long, Trịnh Hữu Long from Taiwan. He's the founder of Luật Khoa Tạp chí. There's also Thảo. Where's Thảo? Is Thảo here? She's a PhD candidate who's also from Vietnam, both of whom are still actively engaged in the discussion and in the growth of the independent civil society in Vietnam. If that is not enough speaking up, I'm not sure what else is good enough. So that's my answer to you, Jilin. With your question regarding more about political development and free and fair elections, my life has always focused first, for the first 10 years of my life, about justice for those who are stranded behind. And the justice then moves on to my next goal, which is independent civil society in Vietnam. I have never been involved or a member of any groups or political party, whether in Australia or here. So politics is something I'm still learning. I don't know much about politics. I know a lot about human rights and therefore independent civil society in Vietnam. I wish I can answer your question regarding that, but I'm no longer even with Voice, so I cannot answer your question. I hope that's good enough.
Thank you. We have two questions here.
Hi, I'm Quốc Hưng Tran. I'm from Dallas. I guess if I can just spend 2 minutes and talk about that big loaded word reconciliation. At the end of the U.S. the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln asked Robert E. Lee if he wanted to participate in the government. And General Lee, who was the general of the Southern Army, he declined, but because the next week he was to become the president of Washington Lee University. So when you talk about reconciliation, that's the spirit of reconciliation. Reconciliation have to come from true wish to want to work together. And like Andao was saying, it has to come from the government, from the authorities in power. We don't have that power to reconcile with anybody. It's the government that has to reconcile with their people, have to free the people, let the people go, give them power to determine their life. So that's the true reconciliation. You cannot have this conference in Vietnam. You will never have this conference in Vietnam because in Vietnam you don't have this kind of political discourse. So when you don't have political discourse, you don't have reconciliation. So I sit here and hear a lot of fallacies in logics. Number one, you cannot go to the lowest denominator to compare. It's true that Vietnam is better than Myanmar, but Vietnam is still not a free country. Not socially, not politically, none. I mean, Freedom House consistently ranked Vietnam as the bottom on the list of 180 countries. I mean, they are number 19. Yes, they're better than some country in Africa, but is our people free? No. So, sorry.
I mean, you finished your statement, but...
Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
My apologies.
Thank you. So, over the years serving the community, I realized that many of us who are living in the U.S. have always condemned the Vietnamese Communist government for not supporting human rights. But I do realize that many of our older generations are not encouraging us, younger generation, to exercise our fundamental freedom of speech. The reason that I want to share with you is that, let's say if I want to praise Võ Văn Kiệt for initiating đổi mới, they're going to say, oh no, don't say that, you're a communist. Or if I praise the football team in Vietnam for beating Malaysia or some other country, they say, no, don't do that. They can say you're a communist. That really bothers me because I feel like I need to be able to express what's good about Vietnam. Ultimately, it is still our country. That's all I have to say.
Since those are two comments, we'll follow.
Sorry, buddy. Sorry. Is that Kevin? Kevin, that's why I started my talk with, it's so bloody liberating to just represent yourself.
Thank you. I feel much better now.
I'm Will. I have a question that's sort of related to... Hey. It's related to... It seems to me that the biggest obstacle seems to be political legitimacy, namely the legitimacy of the Vietnamese Communist Party. I wanted to ask the panelists, will there ever be a point where you accept that the party is in some form legitimate? And if reform should ever occur and elections occur, do you accept that they should participate in the political process? Because, Bác Chan, you mentioned how when the wall fell and elections occurred in Eastern Europe, actually a lot of the communist parties participated in the elections, but they changed their names. The power structures remained there, they just changed their names and they continued participating in the process. Would you be okay if the Communist Party of Vietnam did something similar?
Can we take one more question before you answer?
Well, thank you. My name is John. I'm not here to bash the Vietnamese Communist government, but I would like to bring up one thing. We heard a lot of talks about Vietnam is on the way, on the progress of being, maybe better society or whatever, but remember, the US government have ranked Vietnam #3 in terms of human trafficking. It's so bad because the government employees of Vietnam is a part of that. And then 2 years ago, they put Vietnam on the most wanted list. My question is, we all talks about social society will bring the betterment to our motherland. But how much or what we can do to improve it? I bring up one example. Just last week, Mr. Vo Chiến Thắng, he's basically the vice minister of the internal affairs. He brought with him a delegate of social society leadership and religious leadership to United Nations, to Washington, D.C. And if you look at his delegate, none of them is true social society, civil society. So how can we really ensure that the civil society that we have spent a lot of money to develop in Vietnam have a true voice to speak for the benefit of the people, not for the government? Thank you.
Great. And I'll take this question because it looks like he want to me to answer. Review the process of the democracy movement in the Eastern Europe after the Communist Party fall. And I believe that I accept that. I'm not extreme that because I would say no to everything. But in some circumstances, we should accept it. Democracy fighting is something very, very special. We need the room to fight. We need the space to fight. So assume that the communists may win the first round, they're not going to win the second round. So they continue to fight for the freedom and fight, automatically we become the democratic country. But it takes a process to do that. The communist member, they train to be managed, they train to be manipulated, the people. So I don't think we can win right away, but at least we need the space. And from there, we continue to fight. That's the word say. If the election and the monitored by UN, that's the best way we can looking for. Right? It's one day they say, okay, I think that you guys too much. So let's do the general election and the observation by the UN. I think that's the best case we can have. But if at least they have to change the constitution to leave the number 4 clause out and make the room for everyone fighting for the freedom and democracy in Vietnam to run for office. They may fail, they may lose. I don't think they can win the communist right the first round. But at least they have to pay to fight for the freedom. So if they say, okay, I'm sorry for the constitution, it's so old and been abused from so many years, and the 4 clause have to be removed. And if they remove it, they open for many chances for the other people. Like you see, when even now, every election they have somebody register for that. They know that by register for that, they go to jail tomorrow. They go to prison tomorrow, but still doing that. So if they have an opportunity to run for the office after the constitution, the 4 clause, race, and then I think that's the change. So I'm not going to really say, okay, you have to move to China before I can run for election in Vietnam. No, I'm not going to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Of course not. No, I wouldn't give them any credit. Like I say, can you show me one thing the Communist Party been done for last 48 years?
Okay, back up.
Oh, that is outside. I've got to put a mask on my face to walk with you. But to go home, I take a mask off to punish my people. So if you go to Washington, D.C., you see, that's open for the Communist Party, send people to here. They act like the professional. They act like civilized people. But they go back, the first thing they do, whoever say different, you go to prison.
Okay, back we have to
tomorrow.
wrap it up. But we have, so then finally, we're going to have Thuy Tran, who is an independent curator historian. If you can, just really quickly summarize some of the awesome political discourse that we just...
Well, it's an honor to be on this panel of very inspiring and impassioned panelists who have years and years of expertise and who have used their position and expertise to influence their channels and to cause activism to create this kind of change from the small to the large, from here to there in Vietnam. And what I got from the audience and the panelists is this idea of resistance. And I'm not sure if reconciliation was the right word. Was that the right R word, or is it about resistance? Is it about taking action and continuing that action in order to create mobilization for change? And as Anh Hoy said, that it has to occur in each one of us as much as it is about a group of us. And to keep in mind that the shared goals of human rights and bringing honor and recognizing the challenges of that process, we must keep that open mind and open communication. And as some of our audience here has said, that we cannot just shut the door. We need to be aware that with it comes so much fear. To walk through that door is already very challenging for especially the younger generation who fear, being called a sympathizer. And so with those thoughts, I want to thank you all for lots of insights.
Well, it's my turn to summarize in Vietnamese. In 1 minute. So basically, I'm a political scientist studying Vietnam, right? So it's good to hear a debate about Vietnamese economy, politics, society, and clearly, there's a debate about that. I suppose stop in Vietnamese. Tôi phải tóm tắt bằng tiếng Việt. Thành ra là cái một vấn đề chính là vấn đề tranh cãi về cái sự phát triển, về thay đổi Việt Nam, phải không ạ? Về chính trị, về kinh tế, xã hội, văn hóa, vân vân. Thì có nhiều ý kiến cho là Việt Nam đã thay đổi nhiều về kinh tế, vân vân, về có thể không về chính trị nhưng về kinh tế, xã hội, vân vân. Còn có những cái ý kiến thì cho rằng là Việt Nam không thay đổi gì hết trong 48 năm qua. Thì hai bên thì đều có cái lý của họ và chúng ta nghe và biết như vậy. Và cái chủ đề thứ hai là vấn đề hòa giải, hòa hợp, phải không ạ? Cái từ đó thì nghe nó hơi nhạy cảm ở đây, tức là tại vì nó có nhiều nghĩa, phải không ạ? Tùy theo cái ý nghĩa mà chúng ta chọn. Và như là anh Trịnh Hội anh hỏi nhiều người thì rõ ràng là mỗi người cho một cái ý kiến khác nhau, phải không? Đó là dựa trên cái nền tảng nào, dựa trên cái bối cảnh nào, dựa trên cái ý nghĩa nào, và cái đôi bên tương tác chỉ với nhau có thể chỉ gửi tiền về Việt Nam là hòa hợp hòa giải rồi, mà cũng theo anh Đạo thì là phải thực sự là hòa hợp hòa giải, phải cho bầu cử tự do thì mới thực sự hòa hợp hòa giải. Thì rõ ràng cái đó là một cái gọi là tiếng Anh gọi là spectrum, phải không? Một cái phổ quang phổ ánh sáng, mà có những người khó tính đối với Việt Nam hay những người dễ tính đối với Việt Nam, thì là tùy theo quý vị chọn, quý vị dễ hay là khó, đó là cái chọn lựa cá nhân của quý vị. Nhưng mà cái này nói hơi dài rồi, nhưng mà đó là cái tôi nghĩ là hai cái nội dung chính của cái cuộc thảo luận hôm nay. Rất cảm ơn các vị diễn giả. Đây là một cái đề tài rất là khó và các vị rất là can đảm khi mà nói cái ý kiến của mình. Và không chỉ nói ý kiến của mình, ý kiến trung thực của mình, mà nói rất hay, nói rất hùng hồn, phải không ạ? Nói rất là thuyết phục và làm cho mọi người đều phải suy nghĩ không biết là trước giờ mình đúng hay mình sai. Thành ra là thôi quý vị tối ngủ ngon, đừng suy nghĩ thêm. Nhưng mà bây giờ là coffee break, 15 phút coffee break, xong rồi sau đó chúng ta sẽ có cái panel kế tiếp về đề tài rất là hay về kinh tế văn hóa.